Well, good morning. Gentlemen, I'm about to introduce my panel guests, but now we have to follow the OECD, and they really started off the discussion we're going to have this morning. They've already been given food to thought here, where we're enjoying breakfast in Toronto. Uh, I've already been introduced as a city councillor, but I'm very excited to be speaking to these gentlemen because between private and public, there has to be huge understanding. And so we're going to get into the challenges being faced that governments have to be aware of and have to find a role in. And so I think what we have this morning are people who can really help us delve into exactly what those challenges are and opportunities in the future in the world of supply chain and how that affects us all. So I want to introduce the panel, although I got to go in order, so I'm shifting from paper to person now. Vomic, who is sitting immediately to my left, is head of Origination, which is out of UK export finance field. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about Origination in a second. We also have Björn Bengtsson, Chief Product and Supply Chain Officer for UNTUCKit. Is anyone sitting wearing an UNTUCKit shirt right now because it's Casual Friday? There may be. Fabrizio Opertti, who's the Manager of Integration and Trade for the Inter-American Development Bank. And certainly there is a changing role here for how banks support us into this, and in particular development banks. There's been lots of conversation about that at the forum, and so we're really looking forward to your contribution. And finally, Dave Fox, who is the Director of the Americas portion for Crisis 24, which is a very interesting multinational firm and dealing very much dealing and trading in some of the challenges we've just heard about in those opening remarks. And so I think your range of contributions will really help us delve into this topic this morning. Um, I really want to emphasize so that people remember it is very much a matter of looking at the change as a result of the big global reset caused by the pandemic. Literally everything has changed. I think it threw a bit of gasoline on the geopolitical situation, which seems to be moving in hyper overdrive in a number of ways. We've also seen, out of the need to address that pandemic, I think it really jump started innovation. But also, what has happened is everything about the way the globe we serve has changed, because literally everyone on the planet has changed the way they consume, the way they experience the world, and hasn't gone exactly back to normal. We're into a new world. In government, it changes the way we plan cities. It changes the way we interact with business and what we do to help business. In Toronto, we just introduced a refresh of our economic plan, how we do economic development and provide economic support to businesses. And a lot of it has to deal with the kinds of things that you face in terms of your supply chain challenges and in running global firms. And we have to locally be able to do whatever we need to do for you on that front. So I need to really learn this morning. So I'm wondering if I could start, Vomic, tell people about Origination a little bit.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Shelley. Thank you for the introductions. And it's actually quite a pleasure to be here on this forum. So thank you to the audience for their attention. I'm representing here actually the UK Export Finance, and will be the voice of the public sector over the course of the discussion. We are Britain's export credit agency. It's a government department, but which operates as the vehicle through which the British government supports export credits and export financing. So Origination is actually, I would almost in terms of broader context, I would position Origination as a result of these disruptions and changes that we are seeing around us. 10 years ago, the function did not exist in our department. It was a reactive place where we would wait for businesses or banks to call us and point out to us where our support is required. What we have been doing over the last few years is proactively go out, engage with industry partners, with of course our British businesses, but also importantly with their stakeholders and customers overseas, which is why I'm here in Canada, and our banking partners to see how best us as a commercial government department can deploy public sector support to complement commercial markets. So by origination, we are talking about proactively building through relationships, driving and growing business volumes for our supply chain and for our stakeholders overseas.
Very good, very good. And I'm gonna jump for a second over to Dave because it's about solutions, but yours is a private sector solution. Tell me a little bit about supply chain security right now, because my intention is we end up back at someone who needs to consume all these services and receive all these assistances in talking to Björn. So Dave, talk a little about the supply chain service to security issues.
All right. Well, thank you, Shelley. So when you're looking at supply chain security, you're really talking about organizational resilience and readiness. But when we're looking at nearshoring, you're looking at efficiency. You're looking at now you're moving away from having supplies in factories to on-time delivery. So there's all kinds of challenges around that. And when you're looking at the costs associated to it, I would say organizational resilience and readiness kind of goes against the efficiency and the cost perspective, because a lot of organizations don't look at it as a cost benefit analysis. It's the what if. So from a security support or a security and safety support, you really need to make sure that your organizations, that their business or crisis management plan, business continuity plan, their business impact analysis plans are all up to speed and up to snuff. But they also need to include a component that's going to bring in some other considerations around security. So not only do they need to be environmental, and we're seeing the escalation in environmental challenges with respect to catastrophic storms. You also need to look at civil disobedience, civil unrest. Same challenges we're experiencing in Canada and the United States, they're experiencing throughout the world. And then lastly, there's a criminal element or organized crime element that is global as well. So, so all of your plans and some of your considerations when you're looking at nearshoring and you're looking at supply chain, you need to continue to take those things into consideration.
And so all of those have to be considered in the boardroom as well as all the way down the line. So the services to the whole organization.
Absolutely. And people are, a big important component of an organization. So
Fabrizio, in terms of all these new challenges are tailor-made really for what a development bank does, but in a way it's a new foray. Or am I wrong about that? Is it the sort of thing that's been rising gradually all along anyway, or are we post-pandemic looking at development banks helping and assisting and investing now in these challenges in new ways?
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thrilled to be here. As a development bank, we believe that trade and investment are key for economic development. In fact, they are responsible for much of the GDP per capita growth in our region. So these are engines of growth, prosperity, job creation. So that from the outset. Post-pandemic, we've seen a certain fragmentation, reconfiguration, and of supply chains, sensitivity to certain sectors in which we believe Latin America and the Caribbean, that's where the IDB acts. We're the largest regional development bank in the world and the first source of development financing for Latin America. There's no energy transition without Latin America and the Caribbean. 65% of the world's lithium is in 3 countries in Latin America.
Yes.
40% of the world's copper, 25% of the world's trade in food, in agriculture, 40% of the world's biodiversity. So this region, right here to the south, is a powerhouse of natural resources and opportunities for clean energy, for food security, for semiconductors, and very sensitive supply chains in the hemisphere. where the considerations of security, of course, are key, where quality is key, where export finance is key, where all the elements that we're discussing here undoubtedly are very important. And as a development bank, we intervene and lend both to public and private sector in our region to try to set the conditions, the business climate and the financial conditions so that these opportunities are generated. And Canada is an important shareholder of our development bank. So we'll talk about that later.
And are you finding that when you go to finance, you have to spell out to your clients, risk management and security needs to be a part of this. Show me the whole prospectus, everything you're going to need, and is that sometimes not really factored in, or they come to you already knowing they need to factor that into the package?
Yeah, I think, Shelley, increasingly there's awareness that trade today is more than just labor arbitrage and comparative advantages. You have to work on security. You have to work on the environmental factor, which pervades everything. The consumer wants it. It's not that the only governments are promoting it, but the consumer is wanting to see how much water was produced in a product, the CO2 emissions. So increasingly there are other elements at hand which make it more complex, which make it more fascinating, and which generate opportunities for private companies as well.
Well, now, Björn, we got all the way there. So I'm going to be checking to see if your company has because we got all the way to ESG in the end there. I'm so excited that the example we have of a user of the chain is UNTUCKit, because at a fascinating time, this company burst onto the scene somehow during the pandemic. A number of those shirts made it into my household. We did a lot of consuming under lockdown, and with a husband, a couple of grandsons, the closets are suddenly full of UNTUCKit. But so you were growing and rising in the middle of the emergence of all these challenges, and so how does a boardroom for a company like this keep track of all of the challenges and manage the growth at the same time? Because you're having to produce more and more, and just learning of the challenges at that time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wouldn't say the pandemic was the best of times for anyone in fashion. I think the companies did best was probably the companies who sold casual things, sweatshirts, sweatpants, etc., work from home type of attire. But of course, as we came out of the pandemic, we had a pent-up demand that really helped us kickstart a business. But the last 18 months has not been gentle to the fashion industry. The economy in the United States for sure has been good. But what we have discovered in fashion, that people really the consumer likes to invest in experiences, travel, other things. Then fashion has not really been a focus for consumer spendings the last 18 months. And even this week, if you follow fashion a little bit, you will see that also LVMH, which is one of the luxury giants, posted very disappointing results. So it seemed this luxury boom is, if not coming to an end, I wouldn't say it's coming to an end because luxury will always be there, but it's definitely stagnated a little bit. But getting back to the pandemic and looking at what happened with supply chains during that time, it was next to catastrophic for the fashion industry for many different reasons. But fashion has always been an international business because we depend on low-cost labor. And the lower in price bracket you are, the lower cost associated with labor you have to seek. So, and of course, the pandemic didn't only have an impact on the fashion industry, but it also had an impact on those people who make our clothes. And for instance, the Bangladeshi population was suffering enormously because a lot of manufacturers were canceling orders, a lot of factories were closing down their facilities, and it was absolutely a horrible situation that we went through. But I think it also made us realize how fragile our supply chains are, and up to this point we have dealt with certain crises in certain geographical regions, and been good at quickly adapting and finding new markets. But during the pandemic, We had no other markets. It was a crisis everywhere. So that was one of the things that really made the industry, I think, sit back and think a little bit about how we are organized and how our supply chain looks like.
Yes, yes. And people had time to delve more into the the governance issues for companies like yours in the fashion industry, looking at changing labor practices.
Yes, absolutely.
The tension in those labor practice activism pain points throughout the world really lead to that geopolitical situation that's
Yes,
affecting them.
absolutely. There's a lot of things going on. I've been working in fashion for 35 years, and as I said to you when we spoke before this meeting, I never seen it as turbulent as the last decade, and it's for many different reasons. Of course, we have geopolitical situation and the relationship between the United States and China is one factor. Changing sentiments among consumers that we have been operating for a very long time, not telling the consumer where we make our clothes and who makes our clothes. All of a sudden, we have a young generation who requires us to take responsibility also for the workplace and the people who make these clothes. We have a consumer who is asking us to make a sustainable product. And then on top of that, we have just recently seen some very strict regulation from the US government when it comes to forced labor, and with Xinjiang province in China, which is a very large cotton producer that basically got shut down, and we had a law called the UFLPA law, Uyghur Forced Labor Act, that really put the industry in a very difficult situation, because we are now obliged to track our entire supply chain back, which means that I have to lead this cotton shirt all the way back to the cotton farm, which of course is incredibly complex and very much goes back to risk evaluation, risk management of our supply chains. So that is something we're looking for in the future to really dig into and actually tracing our product upstream. It's going to be extremely complicated, but it's going to be required.
Yes, and sometimes the consumer very much wants that.
Yeah.
It's a new consumer out there, those that are younger than myself. So, Vomic, these are playing out in the UK as well, and I think a lot of people don't think of the UK as an exporter. You think of it as a consumer. This because it's such a physically it looks like such a small nation compared with some place like Canada, but it is very much an exporter. So. And it's kind of in a very tense place in the center of the world. So, how have you had to help exporters in the UK deal with the geopolitical tensions, and particularly from where they are positioned?
Yeah, Shelley, absolutely. I think all of these themes very much topical for us back in the UK. And when we are looking at projects to finance, just the due diligence that is undertaken is very different from even a few years ago. Before I joined the civil service, I was an investment banker, where our due diligence processes used to be a little bit almost in comparison were quite mild and checklist mindset driven than the very much holistic changing standards and practices that we go through now. So we have our equivalent of the Forced Labor Modern Slavery Act. So when we are going back to the supply chain due diligence, it takes a lot for us to make sure that when we are supporting our UK exporters, they are not, for lack of a better word, getting involved in supply chains that might be contaminated by some of the issues that Björn has just noted, and there are several others. So so for us, in terms of the geopolitics, right, the China consideration is one, the conflict in Ukraine very much front and center for us, and then of course the Middle East. So and part of my day job and my team's day job with Origination is to stay sighted on these challenges and help our private businesses navigate those as far as finance and insurance is concerned. Because what we are doing is, when we are looking at providing our export finance, finance, we are acting as a credit enhancer, as a risk sharing tool and mechanism. So in that narrow sense, the greater the economic volatility or uncertainty, that's when we really come into our own, because that's when we step in to help private providers of capital, commercial banks, capital markets, to get that last mile, last step over the line.
Right.
And we see that as our role. So we are happy to take on that, to have that highest relative risk appetite. And in terms of the UK's position as an exporter and what are the areas in which we look to support them? So look, the UK, yeah, physically small country, but we like to think we punch above our weight.
Yes.
So what you will find is that, for example, if you look at the UK's industrial strategy, industrial base, it is one of the most open economies in the world, especially compared to many Western peers. So what has happened is that the industrial base over time of the UK has been acquired by actually quite often North American-based multinational groups. So now they've passed on the asset, but Bombardier here for several years owned British Rail, what used to be the legacy British Rail asset, and now it's French-owned Alstom. General Electric has massive investments in the UK. So quite often when we are identifying the supply chain, we have to look beyond the brand, and this is a conversation I have with people here in Toronto that, oh, but that's American. I'm like, no, but that's coming out of the UK facilities. That's UK content which we will support. Mm-hmm. So that's one consideration. The other one is that in the profile of UK industry is also, just to generalize it, is that we don't have large prime contractors that are going out and securing business like Bechtel's of this world or SNC Lavalin. Right. We don't have those groups, besides Rolls-Royce, which is a notable name. But what we do have are tier 2, tier 3 supply chain that feed into the big contractors. And that's why our offer and our proposition becomes relevant actually for the Canadian-based contractors who are going out and building massive pieces of infrastructure here and around the world. Our pitch to them is that actually we will help with the financing of the projects as long as there's a certain procurement from the UK. And then when you put all of that together, you realize that actually the UK is a pretty significant exporter. Our government's target is to hit £1 trillion in exports in the next couple of years, and we think we will get that. And then, of course, besides the goods, a big part of UK exports tend to be services related, which are high value add, right, high margin, and we facilitate and structure our products around to make sure the services side is getting supported too.
Right. I know this. I know the exporter role because I looked it up. Politicians didn't used to be able to look things up so easily, but I was able to, and it came as a surprise. So Fabrizio, in looking at vulnerabilities, the tiers of it all, who are the really large interests, and then who supports that. That is something that I think governments can lose track of. We might sit in an executive table with those larger interests and not realize the impact of the disruption all the way down to some of the suppliers to them. From your perspective, who's most vulnerable? Should we be looking at regional vulnerabilities, or should we be looking at where along the chain, at what level of manufacture or export? Who's most vulnerable in the globe from your perspective as an operation of development banking and finance?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's hard to have sort of a binary answer to that. I would say that we're seeing a tendency towards diversifying risks, so not being over-dependent on any one nation or country for certain sensitive supply chains. For example, Canada is part of an initiative that President Biden launched at the Summit of the Americas in 2022 in LA, which is the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, APEP, right. APEP, which is 10 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, plus the US and Canada. And as a development bank, we're supporting analysis on certain supply chains like semiconductors, like medical devices and pharmaceutical, like critical minerals for the energy transition, which pose opportunities in the hemisphere for that risk diversification, which goes back to your question of handling the security challenges as well. These are huge. Semiconductors is $500 billion. The gap or the dearth of human capital in the semiconductor area is also quite massive. It will require until 2030 100,000 additional jobs per year just for the semiconductor sector and industry, in which there are certain stages of the supply chain, like wafer production, which are very capital intensive and can be produced in developed nations like Canada, US, but then you have assembly, testing, packaging, and different segments. So that's where it gets very interesting, the tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. For example, Intel invested 1.3 billion in Costa Rica in this sector. So when you look at a supply chain, you have to look at its different segments. It's very intensive in services as well, which to your point, I come from a much smaller country than Canada in terms of population, Uruguay, in the very south, and we export very good beef, but also we export software for the traceability of the cows, which a chip goes in each cow. So when you go to the supermarket and you consume whichever cut you want, it will tell you, the whole traceability through that technology. So increasingly, there's this, what we call the certification. Chile exports copper, but also Chile exports engineering services in the copper area. So that sort of fragmentation and service that goes with the goods makes it more complex, and I think makes it more fascinating as well.
Yes. When you started to talk about the need to diversify, Dave was nodding vigorously. Your organization is advising all across the globe, and it sounds like diversification is one of your biggest messages. Is that the key to reducing vulnerability?
Yeah, absolutely. So big. It's and Fabrizio know very well. Like when you're looking at the Americas, the risks associated with the I'd say the Mexico-U.S. border is very sensitized because of the media, but the Darien Gap in the southern part has a totally different set of considerations around the safe movement of commerce. And then we have the considerations that were brought up earlier around environmental activism or civil disobedience. So when we're working with clients that are looking at their supply chain and they're trying to get to the biggest market in the world, which is the United States, we're looking at things that in their supply chain, are they going to lose their fast lane access at the U.S. border because there's as much methamphetamine or other things coming in with their products and cash and guns going back the other way? Are there concerns around product being stolen for scrap? Is there insider considerations? Are there trucks being picked off and large components of their trade being taken by organized crime groups? And it's a very dynamic and difficult kind of environment down there, and it happens in Canada, the United States. And that you would think that it's you always look to an insider. But an insider down there might, you might think it's somebody that could be, we use the terminology silver or lead. They could be being, coerced and paid to be, compliant to help identify what would be, of the most value to kind of take along the way, or they may be, the subject of extortion or threat. And so it's a very different dynamic to kind of work with that. And then when we look at our civil disobedience and you look at civil unrest, you look at examples of what we went through here recently with our trucker blockade.
Yeah.
And if we bring it back to the Ortega uprising in Nicaragua in 2018, our team went in and supported a client there that was, a global manufacturer, was at risk of losing many contracts because they couldn't deliver their product or the components of the product that were required under their contractual obligations. And what our team did was it's a little bit of that digital insight. So that AI, we went in and did a bit of a death side assessment, but got on the ground and did some stuff around, with human intelligence and talked to the people that were kind of, responsible for these thousands of people in the street that were disrupting the movement of commerce, and informed them, listen, this company is looking at mothballing their factories, and many of your family members might be losing jobs. So they found a way to kind of, get the buy-in of the community, the local community, because it was going to impact them to allow them to continue to carry out commerce.
That's really close-up work. I thought it was more advice, but that's really getting on the ground.
I'm sure if we could do it, if we could have done it in Canada, but unfortunately we had to go over a couple of bridges to get to our, our biggest trading partner. But
And you said the word. I saved time at the end of the panel for all of us to talk about this, but you just lobbed AI into that answer.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot about digital insights, right?
This, I think, we've been talking about it throughout the forum, but I think that this is one of the best conversations to have it in, because really, the supply chain is probably, in terms of risk management, but also in terms of just for manufacture on up, and having to be able to account for and track your product from the cotton fields on up, as Björn just said. Computational AI at the very least is probably your early adopters. So, in terms of solving all these problems, is AI and really IoT is the Internet of Things already making it more possible to solve these things, or are there more and more ways to integrate it into what you have to do?
Well,
Björn,
when we talk about
perspective.
traceability and risk mapping of your supply chain, of course, AI is valuable because basically to do a risk analysis in China, you have to really scrape a lot of data off, things like WeChat and the social media in China. So definitely AI helps us with the software we're available today to do risk analysis on suppliers, and especially, of course, to find out who might be connected to Xinjiang, because if you have done business in China, you know it's extremely complicated, and Chinese government have interest in many, many businesses. And in order to get that data, AI is very helpful in building these supply trees, which can indicate where the connections are. So that is definitely one AI application. Of course, also, how do we bring goods from different market into United States? What are the best shipping rates? What is the most efficient transit route, etc.? There, AI also making great inroads. These are very simple applications of AI in general, but that is probably where AI made its greatest inroads, is where can you simply apply AI to get a more automation into the process, and how can you automate very manual, tedious process that might be very complex, by the way, but is still very manually oriented, and that I think we have seen great inroads from AI. When we talk about AI in fashion, of course, in fashion it's a big discussion, because we're very interested in predictive analysis, especially on the consumer side. Will we be able to predict what consumers will wear in fall 25? AI can help us. I mean, we're not believers in AI for predictive analysis, but it can do tremendous things in considering various type of factors that might influence consumers' decisions. So it's definitely an interesting field. Plus, of course, its application in design. Can it help us design better product, etc.? So it's a big discussion in the fashion industry right now. How should we adopt AI, and will the consumer accept this adoption of AI? So it's being widely debated right now, and we've seen we've seen both negative and positive things from it. So.
Right. So Fabrizio, when you talked about just in the operation of semiconductor production, you talked about 100,000 jobs needed now. And I, as a person from government, I'm thinking, well, that's a workforce development assignment for us, and we're always a little behind what you need. Does that mean that, if it's that integrated into the manufacture of goods and the distribution of things, that's the kind of workforce development you want government to be providing so that those 100,000 jobs come with the competencies?
I think the dialogue with the private sector for government is key in order to develop the training programs. We've had very successful experiences in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, when we put public and private together. We actually adapted a practice from Bangalore, from India, called the finishing schools, which are the finishing skills needed in order to get a job, basically. And these are company-specific, individual company, public-private partnerships in which the content is determined by the company, by the investor in the country that needs a certain skill set, and then the government does a lot of the convening with the universities, with the students in order to develop these programs. So we find that super successful. The impact is very very positive, and it's a way for governments, and talking about AI, to catch up with with the market, with the private sector. Private sector market always goes faster, but the governments have a role in generating the public goods, the guardrails, the appropriate balances in order to embrace progress, embrace technology. The CEO of Ericsson yesterday at lunch said that AI, undoubtedly, he's an optimist, so am I, can be a force for good. But we have to embrace it with the appropriate guardrails for productivity, for prosperity, and there is a role for the public sector there, undoubtedly.
Right. And if you're thinking, I'm going to catch Fabrizio when he comes down and ask more about this finishing school model, all I can say is me first, because I don't think we have that. Vomic, what a British term, though. The finishing schools.
Yes, it is very traditional.
Used to be where someone like me would go at the end of my education to learn how to be a good wife to landed gentry.
or to learn typing skills.
Yes, this sounds like a far better application for the term finishing school. Those skills that actually make you employable for what's on the ground right now. Is there a similar sort of workforce development tool emerging in the UK that you know of?
Yes, actually, absolutely. For us, again, it goes hand in hand with the technological changes that we are having. We are going through another sort of industrial sort of repivoting in the country. So some of the so-called old industries, like the steel sector, we have just recently there's one of our more sort of landmark electric arc furnaces, so not the blast furnaces, is shutting down in Wales, and that has a disruptive effect on the communities and the towns around that site, which for generations have been reliant on that steel plant for employment. So having having a job sort of transition program which helps people transfer their skill set to new areas and new technologies is one of the government's top priorities. From our standpoint, there's of course lots of other support that goes in. We UKEF also endeavor to play a part because colleagues have talked about impact, and we see job creation as a significant sort of demonstration of the impact of our work. And we have financing schemes that facilitate transition, sort of energy transition in particular. So anyway, for example, now the UK actually just last week, for the first time, completely eliminated reliance on coal for power generation. So that was a big milestone for us. But that's a classic example of an energy transition process where the workers and the employers there can then actually we can fund some of those programs.
Yes. So we talked about using it as a force for good. We were talking before the panel. I recently took a course at the U of T because we have to know as much about it as possible, also to keep our own government secure, to understand. But AI is sometimes being used for forces for evil, and so I'm wondering, Dave, if in terms of working with your clients. You have to, they have to be able to manage the risk that's being posed by it now. But are you also saying, but also adopt for the good that it can do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. We could talk for quite a bit on how it's used to take advantage of people and organizations and whatnot. If you go back to key principles and put key, dual-factor authentication in place for transactions and whatnot to ensure that you're actually dealing with the person at the other end of the phone or that you're not being exploited or taken advantage of. So it's getting really challenging. We look at an incident, say of an extortion or an attempt to kidnap, and they can feign and put somebody that's on the phone that may sound and look like a loved one or an executive. So I mean, but I'd like to definitely want to end on a higher note before we leave. And when we go back to organizing resilience and readiness, and you look at crisis management and business continuity. What we found, and we're very fortunate to get to work with some of the world's most progressive and global with a global footprint. Those that have invested in really comprehensive programs around resilience and readiness, and the anticipatory component of anticipating risk, whether it's financial, organizational, supply chain, all these things, and have a comprehensive program to respond and recover from it. What we've learned from them that have had multiple entities that maybe are behind in the training is those that have invested in it, the downtime for any of the facilities has been reduced by 2 or 3 days. So that's a good use of AI from the anticipatory component of risk and risk analysis across all kinds of components.
Exactly. Well, in the few minutes that are left, I want you to explain to me a concept and then talk to me about is this a big part of helping us in future challenges? This whole concept of friendshoring. Wondering, Vomic, if you've looked into it in terms of helping UK exporters and importers. The whole concept of friendshoring, is that for suppliers trying to get things to us, is that really the future of being able to cooperatively survive various geopolitical disruptions?
Yes, we have that on our front radar, so to speak. Where in the past we wouldn't bother too much. Again, going back to the due diligence, that we might not be that concerned about supply chain logistics, where a product is coming from and how it's traveling and coming around. Now it's an important part of our project review. So, so to put it in practice in terms of friendshoring. So the scenario that we would be looking at would be facilitating the construction of a facility in the UK, which has an export angle. So it can serve both domestic and export needs. But as long as there's an export need, export outlet for a facility, we will help in the construction of that. So at the moment, we are financing in the renewable energy industry. We are financing a wind farm linked monopile factory in the north of England, which will supply continental Europe as well as for domestic needs.
Right.
Then we have other scenario would be where the site is not in the UK, but is in a like-minded sort of friendly country. So it could be Europe, it could be here. And there, our motivation to consider financing is that in the construction of the facility back to that UK content and UK sourcing, design, engineering, some kit is going in from UK businesses, and then we will help have a constructive financing conversation.
And that's something that might never be known to the electorate, so to speak, out there, whichever is your constituency, in this case, the UK. They might never know that you're investing in that, but the economic development case can be made for it.
Yes, absolutely. It's a fascinating part of my job in that respect. It's actually quite exciting, yes. Mm-hmm.
Does that interest you, Björn? Do you think, hey, there's some potential for us? We need that help.
Well, I think in fashion, we have the supply chains we have because we need them. And fashion is always, if we look at the fast fashion part of the fashion industry, which is really driving a lot of the exploration of new supply chains, I think the days of opportunistic sourcing is coming to an end. With the demands we have from consumers and government means that we have to create much stronger partnership with our suppliers and rather than bouncing around wherever we find the lowest cost. But so I see a future where there's a sourcing that is based more of doing good, which is a very positive thing for the fashion industry. I see a relationship where we go into new countries and we actually invest not only in buying goods, but also in the communities we operate and supporting those communities. We're running out of low-cost countries to produce in. And I sincerely hope as we now move into the African continent, which is going to take us a decade or so to go in there. But I hope we approach it a little bit different than we did in Bangladesh and really invest in the communities and the labor. That is my hope. I will be retired and playing golf when that happens, but for the future generations. Okay.
Well, I can tell you, there's a 19-year-old woman consumer in my household who actually makes her decisions on that basis.
Yeah.
She wants to know
Many of the young
ESG
generation
of
do.
it before she actually types in her bank card number, which is so inspiring. It kind of guilts me into doing the same.
Yes.
Fabrizio, are we going to see that in Latin America as well? That being attuned to the practices?
Yeah, supply chains and trade and investment are just more than comparative advantage, more than labor arbitrage. Today, it's about human rights, it's about labor rights, it's about democracy, it's about the environment, it's about social safeguards. And the consumers, like the 19-year-old, look at this. And ultimately, like Adam Smith said, you produce something so that somebody consumes it. And that consumer is determining this way of production. And just to be, to end on a high note as well, there are many friends in this hemisphere, in Latin America and the Caribbean, many democratic, stable nations, and the IDB, as a development bank, is there to facilitate those connections, that networking, those investments. We have a platform called ConnectAmericas.com, millions of users to look at trade and investment opportunities. So we're also embracing technology in order to deal with a more complex world of trade and investment, but full of opportunities.
Well, then I don't have to create a closing remark high note. That's it. Times 10, Latin America plus everyone else adopting those practices. I think we might be on the right track. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm optimistic now.
Okay.
I might not necessarily have been when we walked on stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.